He was born in 1491, the youngest of 13 children. In 1521, during the Battle of Pamplona, he was seriously injured when a cannonball struck him, wounding one leg and breaking the other. While recovering from his injuries, he experienced a spiritual conversion, and that became the turning point of his life. From then on, he desired to follow the example of spiritual leaders such as Francis of Assisi and devote himself to a life of service for God. After his conversion, he had a number of visions, including a notable one at Manresa on the banks of the river Cardener. The vision helped him to find God in all things. He later became a priest, and on Christmas Day of 1538, he celebrated his first Mass at the Church of St. Mary Major. In 1539, he and a few companions formed a religious order. He was unanimously elected to take the position of Superior General, a lifelong appointment. His name was Ignatius of Loyola. In 1540, Pope Paul III approved this religious order known as the Society of Jesus or the Jesuits. Europe would never be the same again.
Let me get your chair for you again here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Isabel, I wanted to ask, have you ever heard of the Jesuits?
Sure. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. He seems to be doing a good job convincing people that the Catholic Church is now in good hands, especially considering all the bad press about child abuse it received pretty recently.
Yes, he is. But do you know the real purpose of a Jesuit?
Well, I've read a few things.
Well, from outward appearances, they come across as humble and loving Christians. They operate hospitals and schools and promote social justice and ecumenical dialogue. But below the surface, this order is filled with hate, murder, intrigue, and deception.
That's interesting.
Yes, it is.
You know, Ernie, I think that's something we should look into. We hear a lot about ecumenism today, and if the Jesuits are behind it, I'm sure we should not be involved with it.
Yes, you're right. I will look into the Jesuit order, and since we are concerned with ecumenism, I'll also make a list of some unfaithful Seventh-day Adventist pastors that are promoting ecumenism within the church.
Sounds good. I'll look into ecumenism.
Well, let me help you with your chair. The Jesuit order is a military organization for the Catholic Church. Ever since their formation, they have been used to infiltrate and, if possible, destroy other denominations. This is why they were so instrumental in the Counter-Reformation. Notice what is required to become a high-ranking Jesuit. My son, heretofore you have been taught to act the disassembler among Roman Catholics, to be a Roman Catholic, and to be a spy even among your own brethren, to believe no man, to trust no man, among the Reformers, to be a Reformer, among the Huguenots, to be a Huguenot, among the Calvinists, to be a Calvinist, among other Protestants, generally to be a Protestant, and obtain their confidence, to seek, even to preach from their pulpits, and to denounce with all the vehemence of your nature our holy religion and the Pope, and even to descend so low as to become a Jew among Jews, that you might be enabled to gather together all information for the benefit of your order as a faithful soldier of the Pope. You have been taught your duty as a spy, to gather all statistics, facts, and information in your power from every source, to ingratiate yourself into the confidence of the family circle of Protestants and heretics of every class and character, as well as that of the merchant, the banker, the lawyer, among the schools and universities, in parliaments and legislatures, and the judiciaries and councils of state, and to be all things to all men, for the Pope's sake, whose servants we are unto death. If that needn't get your attention, notice what the oath required. The following is only part of their oath. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity present, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infant heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poignard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed so to do by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith of the Society of Jesus. To some, this may seem hard to believe, especially since the election of Pope Francis. But in 1967, Dr. Alberto Rivera, a Jesuit, escaped from the order, and he described his Jesuit oath in exactly the same way as we have just seen. In the book, Great Controversy, Ellen White also describes the order in similar language. Throughout Christendom, Protestantism was menaced by formidable foes. The first triumphs of the Reformation past, Rome summoned new forces, hoping to accomplish its destruction. At this time, the Order of the Jesuits was created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. Cut off from earthly ties and human interests, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason, and conscience, holy silence, they knew no rule, no tie, but that of their order, and no duty but to extend its power. There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and re-establishment of the papal supremacy. When appearing as members of their order, they wore a garb of sanctity, visiting prisons and hospitals, ministering to the sick and the poor, professing to have renounced the world and bearing the sacred name of Jesus, who went about doing good. But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purpose was often concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the church. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to be the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. The Jesuits rapidly spread themselves over Europe, and wherever they went, there followed a revival of popery. The Jesuits are far from being Christians. They are servants of Satan. Their purpose is to infiltrate governments and churches to further the cause of Catholicism. The question is, have they infiltrated the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Or are we somehow immune or invisible to them? Former Jesuit Alberto Rivera wrote in 1979, "Because of my experience in espionage, I was ordered to join the ecumenical forces under Pope John XXIII. The Protestants were no longer to be called heretics, but separated brethren." Rivera notes that they had successfully infiltrated all religions, including every Christian church. Through their undercover agents, they have been accepted as teachers, pastors, and evangelists. The message they have been pushing is love and unity. No wonder most Protestant churches are no longer protesting. Further down the page, Rivera notes that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was one of the first Protestant groups they moved on. He says, "The first Protestant groups they, the Jesuits, moved on were the Seventh-day Adventists and the full gospel businessmen. Then into the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, etc., until they were all infiltrated, including the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. All the seminaries, universities, and colleges were next. The Jesuits directed Catholic Youth Action, Legion of Mary, and Knights of Columbus, who pulled it off. Now all these groups are silent about Rome or claim that the Roman system is a Christian church. They are winning through compromise. Almost all Protestant pastors are afraid to speak out against Rome. If they did, those planted in their churches would attack them on command." No wonder little is said about the Antichrist in our churches anymore. In the book With Cloak and Dagger by H.H. Myers, we read, in a later public interview with Mike Clute, Alberto not only reaffirmed that Jesuits had penetrated the SDA Church, but said that on a membership basis, the SDA Church has been infiltrated more thoroughly than any other. Not surprisingly, along with the Roman Catholic Church, some evangelical-type Adventist ministers and academics have not only denied Rivera's claim, but they are known to have exercised their imagination with hilarious descriptions of Jesuits lurking in the shadows of Adventist churches and institutions. Finally, let's hear Alberto speak for himself. In this first short clip, he mentions that Jesuits would train to become Seventh-day Adventists. Now, why would they do that?
Where I prepare Cursigistas, the Legion of Mary, the Blue Army, many of these militant organizations. I train and prepare how they can become Baptists, how they can become Adventists, how they can become Methodists, how they can become Presbyterian, how they can become Pentecostal, and all these areas where they most infiltrate any area.
In another interview, Alberto notes that Jesuits had infiltrated the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Is an issue. Is that a product of the Jesuits? Or what do you know about that?
Well, what I know is this, that even the Seventh-day Adventist denomination has been placed under the greatest setup and a real setup of all the history of the denomination. And the proof and evidence is that now the leadership is already in a position where they themselves cannot play the role of Frankenstein no longer, because they're being unveiled, they're being discovered, and their intents and their true intents and cases where already most of them has been already trained, prepared by Jesuits to be where they are.
Now, why should this not surprise us? After all, doesn't the Bible say the devil went to make war with a remnant church? If this is the case, then we can't be immune to this problem. The Jesuits have been playing this game since the Council of Trent. They have plenty of experience. We also have an account of Jesuit infiltration into Adventism from as early as 1936 at Washington Missionary College, which is now known as Washington Adventist University. It was experienced by Dr. Benjamin G. Wilkinson, who was president of the college at that time. He was able to uncover a Jesuit instructor who was teaching Bible classes at that college. When Wilkinson confronted the instructor, he left the campus immediately, and Wilkinson never saw him again. Because the Jesuits are so good at what they do, they leave very little evidence behind which could incriminate them. One such person fits this category. Born on January 29, 1938 in Rome, Dr. Samuel Bacchiocchi became the first ever non-Catholic to study at the Jesuit-run Pontifical Gregorian University. It just so happens that this university was founded by Ignatius of Loyola. In 1974, he completed a doctorate in church history on the subject of the decline of the Sabbath observance in the early church, based on research at the Vatican libraries. This earned him a gold medal from Pope Paul VI, a distinction with the highest praise. That very same year, he began teaching at Andrews University as professor of theology and church history until he retired in 2000. Bacchiocchi explains in his End Time Issues newsletter, number 159, that Andrews University helped finance his studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University. In 1977, he published the book From Sabbath to Sunday, which gained approval from Rome. This minute contains nothing contrary to Roman Catholic belief, and the Roman Catholic Church gave him a license to print or publish it. On the back cover, we note the following. Dr. Samuel Bacchiocchi spent 5 years at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, examining the most ancient available documents. The results of this investigation are presented in From Sabbath to Sunday. In the acknowledgments in the same book, Bacchiocchi states, I might mention that in a few places my interpretation of certain biblical texts such as Revelation 1:10 and Colossians 2:14-17 and of historical data differ somewhat from the traditional position of my church. Further research reveals that Bacchiocchi not only differed somewhat from the traditional position of these verses, but he continually undermined key points which identify the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and the Sabbath. On page 116 of this book, Sabbath to Sunday, he writes, in the light of the above consideration, it seems very unlikely that the phrase Lord's Day of Revelation 1:10 refers to Sunday. It rather appears to be a variation of the expression the day of the Lord, which is commonly employed in the scripture to designate the day of the judgment and of the parousia, or second coming. We would therefore concur with J.B. Lightfoot in concluding that there is very good, if not conclusive, evidence for thinking that the day of judgment was intended. In other words, Bacchiocchi believes Seventh-day Adventists have no right to claim John received his vision on the Sabbath. But notice how this compares with the clear words of the Spirit of prophecy. It was on the Sabbath that the Lord of glory appeared to the exiled apostle. The Sabbath was as sacredly observed by John on Patmos as when he was preaching to the people in the towns and cities of Judea. He claimed as his own the precious promises that had been given regarding that day. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, John writes. Obviously, there's a conflict between what Bacchiocchi taught and what John and Ellen White taught. No wonder the Pope blessed his book. But this wasn't the only text in which he disagreed with Ellen White. In 2 of his end-time newsletters, number 86 and repeated in 216, after his retirement, he taught that Islam fit John's prophecy of the beast better than the papacy. The little horn power would come into prominence after the breaking up of the Roman Empire. This distinguishing mark fits better Islam than the papacy. The traditional Adventist interpretation found in the SDA Bible Commentary and in Mervyn Maxwell's God Cares maintains that the 3 horns uprooted refer to the eradication of the Heruli in 493 and Vandals of 534 and the Ostrogoths in 538. The problem with this interpretation is that none of these 3 Germanic tribes were really eradicated. Furthermore, the papacy never gained control of their territories. Towards the end of his newsletter, he attacks the 1260-day prophecy, which is a key point for identifying the Antichrist. Historically, our Adventist Church has interpreted this prophetic period as representing the 1260 years of papal domination from 538 to 1798. Supposedly, the prophetic period of the Antichrist began in 538. This interpretation poses 2 major problems which thinking Adventists have long recognized. In fact, during the past few months, I have received several email messages and calls from pastors who have asked me to help them understand more fully what really happened in 538. A more satisfactory interpretation of the prophetic period of 3.5 years is suggested by its symbolic usage to represent, on the one hand, the time of domination of the Antichrist, and on the other hand, the protection of God's people in time of persecution. Why do Daniel and John the Revelator use the 3.5 years period to represent the persecution and protection of God's people during the time of the Antichrist? Most likely because 3.5 is half of 7, which is a number of God's completion and perfection. Half of 7 suggests incompletion and limitation. In other words, the forces of the Antichrist are limited and will not reach their scope of the complete destruction of God's people. Bacchiocchi undermines the year-day principle which the Jesuits hate. He casts doubt on the starting date of 538, and he reinterprets the 1260-day prophecy so that it cannot fit only the papacy. In a presentation on 666 and the Mark of the Beast, Bacchiocchi presented the same idea to students at Andrews University.
Now I want to use another example of the use of number, the age of the church. Now, nobody knows the day. Nobody knows the hour. It is not for you to know the time, Jesus says, because it is fixed by God. And yet John uses an analogy. He uses a kind of a code. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1260 days. You know, these are numbers designed to help to conceptualize something which is perhaps beyond human comprehension. Why 3.5? Why 3.5 years? Perhaps because it is a broken 7. 7 is completion, half of 7. It suggests, you know, incompletion, limitation, yes, but we don't use number in the same way. That's why we have a problem when we read Revelation, because we don't understand the deeper meaning of numbers, you know.
When a professor at Andrews University presents views like this, you can be sure the Jesuits have infiltrated the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We can be thankful that God has given us the spirit of prophecy to protect us from such erroneous views. Notice the following regarding the 1260-day prophecy. Not till after the great apostasy and the long period of the reign of the man of sin can we look for the advent of our Lord. The man of sin, which is also styled the mystery of iniquity, the son of perdition, and that wicked represents the papacy, which, as foretold in prophecy, was to maintain its supremacy for 1260 years. This period ended in 1798. If Bacchiocchi was a true Seventh-day Adventist who believed in the ministry of Ellen White, he would never have accepted such erroneous views that undermine the identifying marks of the Antichrist. But as we saw in Episode 4, when we looked at Ellen White's writings, he has made them of none effect. He accepts what agrees with his opinions and rejects what disagrees with them. This is why in his End Time newsletter, number 87, he undermined her ministry. He wrote, "If Ellen White was alive today, would she welcome the service of competent scholars willing to correct the remaining inaccuracies found in the Great Controversy and other publications?" It is unfortunate that Ellen White has passed away, because the revision that was done to the Great Controversy in 1911 did not eliminate all the historical inaccuracies. There is still much work that needs to be done, but without her presence and approval, the E.G. White estate has no authority to undertake this project. And we can thank God that such a project has not happened to date. If people like Bakyoki were given the opportunity to correct these supposed errors, the historical evidence and prophetic interpretation that identify the papacy as the Antichrist would no doubt be removed or reinterpreted. Not only did Bakyoki undermine key text for the Sabbath and the identification of the Antichrist, but he also makes it harder to identify what the mark of the beast is. Notice carefully what he said to the students at Andrews University.
Now, historically, we as Seventh-day Adventists have tried to differentiate between the two. We have identified, the mark with Sunday observance and the number with the Pope's title, Vicarious Filii Dei. But as we noticed before, Revelation 13:17 tells us that the mark, the name, and the number are essentially the same. So any attempt to separate them does not do justice to the text. They all represent the evil nature of the beast, which is bent on enforcing the false worship. Now, we have tended, folks, to interpret this conflict, end-time conflict over worship, as being controversy over the 2 days, Saturday versus Sunday. As you know, I spent years of my life investigating the origin of Sunday observance. There is no question to me that the introduction of Sunday worship has affected the spiritual qualities of millions of people throughout the century. But I like to propose to you that we may have to broaden our horizon. There is more to false worship than observing the true day. I believe that these 2 days, Saturday versus Sunday, must be seen as representative of two different forms of worship. True worship versus false worship. I will be in London now in a couple of weeks, and if I have to stop in a street and ask somebody, what does Sunday worship means to you? 90% of the Britain would say nothing, because only 7% of them bother to go to church. And in my country, in Italy, if I was to ask the same question, what does Sunday keeping means to you? They would say nothing, because 95% of them go to church 3 times in their life, when they're hatched, matched, dispatched. Those are the 3 trips they make to church, when they are baptized, married, and buried. So these people, for them, the Sabbath, Sunday is not an issue. The issue is, observing a day and observing no day. Are you with me? So I really believe that time has come for us to open our eyes and see that the whole issue of false worship is much more complex. It has a much broader scope. You follow me? I see the Sabbath as a worship that is God-centered. We give priority to God in our thinking, in our living 24 hours. It's a worship that represents total commitment, total dedication. And I see Sunday keeping or even or not keeping at all as a self-centered worship. What are people worshiping today? They are worshiping pleasure. They are worshiping profit. That is what really counts for them.
According to Bakyoki, we have to broaden our horizon. This means that the mark of the beast is not about a day we worship, but rather, are we worshiping God or ourselves? Notice one of the many statements made by Ellen White on this subject. When the test comes, it will be clearly shown what the mark of the beast is. It is the keeping of Sunday. Those who, after having heard the truth, continue to regard this day as holy, bear the signature of the man of sin, who thought to change times and laws. It's interesting to note who some of Dr. Bakyoki's supporters were in this false theology. At the beginning of the video we have just watched, Dr. John Pauline and Dr. Ranko Stefanovic, both professors at Andrews University at that time, give a short speech endorsing Bachioki's false theology. Notice what they say.
For about 20 years, I've been teaching the book of Revelation with a number of audiences of pastors, maybe 1,000 pastors over the years. And each time we come to the 666 and the mark of the beast and discuss various views there, I've come increasingly to the sense that some of the things that have been said traditionally have been questioned for a long time, 80 years, even 100 years by some of the Adventist pioneers. And yet I didn't have time to do the research myself, didn't have all the tools. And about a year ago, the thought occurred to me, we've got somebody right in this campus area who, if anybody can do a history of the papacy and sort of examine the whole background of these things, it would be my friend Sam Bachioki. So I invited him to come. Why don't you just come to the class, take a half an hour, and tell us what you know about vicarious filii Dei and 666 and so forth. Well, he wasn't content to do that. He put in about 500 hours of research, dug up all kinds of pictures and backgrounds and history, and I personally feel that this is the definitive research on the subject. There may be a lot more to learn, but I'm not aware of anybody who's come even close to what you're about to hear.
Dr. Bachioki, as it was mentioned by Dr. Pauline, has invested a great amount of time in his research. He spent many, many hours doing this research. And a few months ago, he presented the first results of his research to the classes on Revelation taught by myself and Dr. John Pauline in the seminary, and also for my students on an undergraduate level. The reaction of the students was very positive, and I believe that all can benefit from his research. Therefore, welcome once again to this very important event. And I hope that we will all benefit from what we will hear tonight. Thank you very much.
I would like, first of all, to express my gratitude to Professor John Pauline and Professor Ranko Stefanovic for coming out tonight to give some words of introduction to this taping of this intriguing prophecy on the mark and the number of the beast. I feel honored by their presence because I view these two gentlemen as the foremost Adventist scholars who have made the greatest contribution to the understanding of the book of Revelation. In fact, much of what I'm about to share with you tonight largely was learned, was apprehended from studying their study. Both of them have written extensively. In fact, at the end of the program, I will show you some of the material that these gentlemen have written. And so I feel very honored by their introduction and by their presence. And
Whether Bachioki was a Jesuit or not makes no difference. He, like many leaders and teachers in the church today, have performed the work of a Jesuit by praising the Pope, attacking Ellen White, and denying essential truths upheld in the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy that identify the papacy as the Antichrist. In Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, Ellen White describes a dream she was given. Notice what she was shown. That night I dreamed that I was in Battle Creek, looking out from the side glass at the door and saw a company marching up to the house, 2 and 2. They looked stern and determined. I knew them well and turned to open the parlor door to receive them, but thought I would look again. The scene was changed. The company now presented the appearance of a Catholic procession. One bore in his hand a cross, another a reed, and as they approached, the one carrying a reed made a circle around the house, saying 3 times, "This house is proscribed. The goods must be confiscated. They have spoken against our holy order." And a warning given in Special Testimonies, Series A, number 12, Ellen White notes, "I must warn all our churches to beware of men who are being sent out to do the work of spies in our conferences and churches, a work instigated by the father of falsehood and deception. Let every church member stand true to principle. We have been told what would come, and it has come. It is the Jesuits who are the spies, according to the oath they must take. What we are dealing with here is very serious. It is the main reason why the church is in such deep apostasy. God knows each and every Jesuit who pretends to be a Seventh-day Adventist. He knows their agenda. In many of my dreams, He has revealed to me the infiltration and damage they are doing in His remnant church. This is happening in different ways. We can clearly see that one way is by promoting Jesuit books, whether quoting from them in a sermon or teaching those beliefs in our universities. Another way is by inviting Jesuits to speak in our universities and churches. Jesuits are ruthless and will persevere with their agenda until they are successful. When the time is right, God will intervene to help His church. If you are a Jesuit, please repent while there is still time. I'm encouraged that God is stronger than any enemy we might encounter.
Ecumenism is a movement that is devoted to unifying the Christian churches. It is also associated with efforts to unite all religions through interfaith pluralism. The movement is part of the Roman Catholic Church's plan to bring about religious unity under the leadership of the Pope. The Jesuits have been instrumental in achieving this. There is no doubt the movement has had great success. Most Protestant denominations no longer teach what the great reformers taught regarding the Antichrist. Today, very few Protestants know how to protest Catholicism. The question that each Seventh-day Adventist needs to ask themselves is whether they're involved in the ecumenical movement. Officially, the General Conference claims that the Church has not joined any ecumenical body. But does this mean we are not involved in ecumenism? On February 2nd, 2013, the former head of the National Council of Churches, Dr. Michael Kinnaman, was invited to speak at the annual Seminary Scholarship Symposium at Andrews University. His speech was titled, "The Ecumenical Movement and Why You Should Be Involved." He began his talk by mentioning the things he appreciated about Adventists, but then shared what he didn't like, our lack of engagement in inter-church relations. To finish his talk, he said, "I like who you are, and it's a joy to be here. My concern, if I can put it that way, is with your grammar. Adventist is a wonderful adjective, but an idolatrous noun. You are not Seventh-day Adventist, but you are Seventh-day Adventist Christians." You have to wonder why the former head of the National Council of Churches was invited to our leading seminary to tell us why we should be involved in ecumenism. You know, there are a number of ways we as a church can participate in ecumenism without becoming official members of a body. This includes 1, activities at the local church level. 2, dialogue with other denominations and church bodies. 3, inviting, quote, experts from other denominations to speak in our churches and schools. And 4, quoting extensively in our books and publications from authors of other denominations. We will take some time now to look at how these areas are impacting the church. According to the official statement on ecumenism, the General Conference notes that on local levels, dealing with more practical and less theological issues, one could envision some forms of Seventh-day Adventist membership with caution, however. We are thinking of such organized relationships as ministerial associations / fraternals, local church organizations, Bible study groups, specific groups, or networks to study community needs and help solve local problems. Adventists must not be perceived as simply opting out of any Christian responsibility for the local community. There are always ways in which we can help people of other faiths without jeopardizing the Seventh-day Adventist faith. Jesus showed that this is possible through social gatherings or meetings on social and health issues. However, when we unite for spiritual reasons, such as attending Easter or Christmas services with other denominations or inviting pastors of other faiths to take services in our churches, this is where we begin to compromise truth. Part of our mission is to call people out of Babylon and bring them into the remnant Seventh-day Adventist Church. But we can't do this while we're uniting with people of other faiths or denominations. For example, the April 21, 1975 issue of The Gleaner, the North Pacific Union Conference's official paper, an article was written titled Congregational Church Adventist Pastor. It told the story of an ordained Seventh-day Adventist pastor named Joe Barnes who made a good substitute congregational pastor. According to the Gleaner, while taking the service one Sunday morning, he then announces that the Enterprise Seventh-day Adventist and congregational churches will be holding joint Easter weekend services. On Friday night, we will be meeting here for a joint communion service. On Saturday morning, you're invited to attend the services of the Adventist Church. And on Sunday morning, we will be inviting the Adventists to attend the Easter services here. During his sermon, he had the opportunity to speak about the immortality of the soul. This is what he told the congregation. The theory of the immortal soul spirit inside the body is probably not the best hypothesis of the nature of man in light of modern science. Since when is modern science the reason why we don't believe in an immortal soul? Now, this is not the story of a pastor who left the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Actually, he was an ordained Seventh-day Adventist minister who obviously felt comfortable worshiping on Sunday. His message to Seventh-day Adventists was, Barnes shakes his head as he thinks about the seclusiveness of some Adventists. He sees so many things that Christians of all faiths have in common and many more ways of reaching out to them. How can we reach other Christians? By joining with them. This is like saying Israel could have reached the pagan nations by meeting with them on their ground and worshiping with them in their temples. The historical Seventh-day Adventist messages are divisive, as they should be, and help people to take a stand for the truth. When our ability to preach the three angels' messages is compromised, we can be sure we have gone too far. Back in 1962, when the Second Vatican Council convened on the subject of ecumenism, Seventh-day Adventist representatives Bert B. Beach and Arthur Maxwell attended as observers. Beach would later become the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. In an interview with Roy Adams, which was published in the Adventist Review, November 8, 2001, Beach identifies the Second Vatican Council as the biggest event of his life. It's sad to think that attending a council hosted by the Vatican would be the biggest event of one's life. In the interview, he gave this warning to Seventh-day Adventists. We should be especially careful when we speak about the Catholic Church, Beach says. We should deal with Catholic theology and teaching as they have emerged from the Second Vatican Council and from other contemporary church documents. We shouldn't just use quotations from the 19th century or even go way back to the days of the Council of Trent. We ought to make sure that what we say they're teaching is really so. If we followed Beach's counsel, we would have to ignore or even get rid of the Great Controversy book because notice what it says. The defenders of popery declare that the church has been maligned and the Protestant world are inclined to accept the statement. Many argue that it is unjust to judge the church of today by the abominations and absurdities that marked her reign during the centuries of ignorance and darkness. They excuse her horrible cruelty as a result of the barbarism of the times and plead that the influence of modern civilization has changed her sentiments. Have these persons forgotten the claim of infallibility put forth for 800 years by this haughty power? So far from being relinquished, this claim has been affirmed in the 19th century with greater positiveness than ever before. As Rome asserts that she never erred and never can err, how can she renounce the principles which governed her course in past ages? Like many of our leaders today, obviously Beach doesn't think much of Ellen White and her 19th century theology. Vatican II may have made it appear that Rome has changed. However, it was a clever ploy to supposedly bring about unity because Rome never changes. When the time is right, it will rise up again to persecute those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath holy as mentioned in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Beach's attitude towards the papacy is not an isolated case. For years, Jesuits have infiltrated the Seventh-day Adventist Church and undermined its doctrines and understanding of last-day events. While the world is following after the beast and Pope Francis is winning hearts and minds across the globe, where does Seventh-day Adventists stand? Perhaps an explanation can be found in the following article by Andre Rice, which appeared in the November 26, 2013 issue of Spectrum magazine. I was struck by how his vision, referring to Pope Francis, his vision for the Catholic Church is so relevant and applicable to the Adventist Church. This seems to be an inversion of roles. To those who still see the papacy as a beast, it is undeniable that it is increasingly speaking more like a lamb than a dragon. You might find it interesting that this untruthful statement comes from someone who has a BA in theology from the Sao Paulo Adventist University in Brazil, has worked for 3 years as a research assistant and translator at the Ellen White Research Center, is pursuing a PhD in New Testament at Avondale College, and in 2011 taught advanced biblical Greek classes and New Testament interpretation at the Adventist Latin American Theological Seminary in Ecuador. In March 1997, the World Council of Churches held a Middle East Council of Churches consultation in Syria. At this assembly, an agreement was worked out for all churches around the world to celebrate Easter on specific Sundays. Under the WCC's Faith and Order Commission, towards a common date of Easter, item 1.3 states, besides the work already done on baptism, Eucharist, and ministry, the churches need to address the renewal of preaching, the recovery of the meaning of Sunday, and the search for a common celebration of Pascha, Easter, as ecumenical theological concerns. It's not surprising that Bert Beach is the first person on the list of participants who represented the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. The World Council of Churches states that they are a worldwide fellowship of churches seeking unity and a common witness. Although the General Conference has officially avoided joining established ecumenical bodies, this has not stopped it from attending their meetings as observers. What is the real purpose of participating in these meetings? To put it into perspective, it would be like ancient Israel sending observers to meet with the neighboring pagan religions in their councils so they could better understand them. What would they gain from such associations? God warned Israel not to have anything to do with their surrounding neighbors. Otherwise, they would be influenced by them and become corrupted. Could this happen to Seventh-day Adventists today? Is it possible that they have been influenced by other denominations? Yes, it is possible, and it has most definitely happened. The errors that were published in the book Questions on Doctrine grew out of discussions with Protestants Donald Gray Barnhouse and Walter Martin. In order to make us acceptable among Protestants, it was made sure that the book redefined Adventism's understanding of sin, the nature of Christ, and the atonement. Over the years, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been involved in much dialogue. For example, on February 15, 2000, the Adventist News Network reported that the Seventh-day Adventist headquarters in Poland issued a joint statement with the Catholic Church. It was the culmination of 15 years of dialogue. The statement begins by stating that the purpose of the dialogue was to try to better understand each other's teachings and practices and to improve relations with each other. The question we should ask is, what type of relationship should Seventh-day Adventists have with the Catholic Church? Yet, how can we improve relations with them while at the same time identifying them as the Antichrist and mother of harlots? The joint statement that resulted from this dialogue included: the statement recognizes that though the churches can refer to similarities, they also see difference between each other's doctrine, practice, and church policies. However, both sides affirm a need to cultivate respect for each other and learn to understand each other. The dialogue was conducted on the basis of partnership, care to uphold the full identity of both sides, as well as their autonomy and independence in the spirit of mutual respect and Christian love, and in recognition of the ideals of tolerance and religious freedom. How can we have mutual respect when we are called to preach the three angels' messages? This includes, in the very time in which we live, the Lord has called His people and has given them a message to bear. He has called them to expose the wickedness of the man of sin who has made the Sunday law a distinctive power, who has thought to change times and laws, and to oppress the people of God who stand firmly to honor Him by keeping the only true Sabbath, the Sabbath of creation, as holy unto the Lord. The perils of the last days are upon us, and in our work, we are to warn the people of the danger they are in. Let not the solemn scenes which prophecy has revealed be left untouched. This work will never be done while we're affirming a need to cultivate respect for the Catholic Church. As Christians, we should already be treating everyone with love and respect. How can dialogue improve what should already be present? The truth of the matter is, Catholics feel a deep sense of disrespect when we expose their church as the beast of Revelation. So as they see it, the only way to have mutual respect is for Seventh-day Adventists to stop preaching the three angels' messages. No wonder Jesus has not returned yet. When Israel was on the border of the Promised Land, they were infiltrated by the Midianites. Today, Seventh-day Adventism has been infiltrated, and many no longer proclaim the truths that other churches view as offensive. On May 5 and 6, 2000, Dr. Bert Beach and Dr. John Graz of the General Conference Department of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, as well as Dr. Angel Manuel Rodriguez of the Biblical Research Institute, met in Rome with Bishop, now Cardinal, Walter Casper and Monsignor John Radano from the Vatican. According to the report, the Roman Catholic Church had manifested interest in holding conversations with Seventh-day Adventists concerning their beliefs. The report mentions that the Catholics showed particular interest in the global nature of our church. We also gave a report on Adventist inter-church relations. Now, why would they do that? Why does the Catholic Church need to know what our inter-church relations are? Further meetings were held in 2001, 2002, and 2003. Even though Adventist scholars were able to present the Adventist understanding of certain doctrines and prophecy, what was the point? They have known what we believe for a long time, just as we know what they believe. At the Toronto General Conference session in July of 2000, Joseph Werner Reed, Under-Secretary of the United Nations, the UN, spoke on behalf of Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the UN. Reed appealed to the representatives of the worldwide Adventist Church by stating the following: to continue to give the United Nations the support we need for our world organization, I make this appeal because the United Nations is also your organization, your United Nations. Without the global efforts of the United Nations, all our efforts for peace, development, equality, and justice would be to no avail. He then delivered the UN Secretary General's message. You may think that the United Nations, an intergovernmental organization, has no room for religion. You may be trying to imagine how spirituality can coexist with the world of diplomacy, national security, and hard-edged negotiations. I would ask you to think differently. I would ask you to take another look. The United Nations is a tapestry, not only of suits and saris, but also of clerics' collars, nuns' habits, and lamas' robes. Religions may manifest themselves in widely different practices and belief systems. The United Nations may display the outward signs of secular pursuits, but at the heart, we are dealing in universal values. That is what the United Nations is good at, to be kind, tolerant, just, or merciful. No single religion can claim a monopoly on such teachings. As men and women of faith, you are natural partners of the United Nations in our endeavor to transcend irrational and ethnic divisions and promote tolerance and understanding. Our shared vision of humanity, one that supersedes artificial constructs, is essential if we're to cope with the complexities of the age of globalization. Such a vision can foster dialogue where divisions persist, understanding where suspicions prevail, and cooperation where discord has impeded progress for too long. This philosophy lies in the heart of the United Nations Charter and must be prominent in all our thinking as we pursue our goals of enduring peace and development for all the world's people in the years ahead. It's one thing to be in a partnership with secular governments and organizations for the good of mankind, but the UN does not limit itself to secular affairs. We have been called to preach the three angels' messages, not to be involved with the United Nations and ecumenism. On May 7, 2006, a delegation from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Middle East met with 4 Islamic studies professors at Qatar University in Doha to promote interfaith dialogue and a better understanding of each other's beliefs. Tibor Zilvazi, leader of the Adventist Church in the Northern Gulf region, added, "There was a genuine sense of brotherhood as we spoke about the urgent need for interfaith dialogue for greater mutual understanding." On August 6 to 9, 2007, theological conversations took place at Andrews University between theologians representing the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists and the World Evangelical Alliance. The introduction of the joint statement stated, "These conversations took place in an atmosphere of amicable Christian fellowship and study, building on the history of increasing fellowship, trust, and cooperation in various countries. The key purposes of these conversations were not to explore any formal joining of organizations, but rather to better understand each other's beliefs and working methods, and to explore possibilities of fruitful cooperation among local churches and in national alliances." Why would the Seventh-day Adventist Church need to develop increasing fellowship, trust, and cooperation in various countries with the World Evangelical Alliance? The statement further said, "Having greatly benefited from this experience, the participants also propose that their respective bodies encourage an ongoing process of theological discussion at all levels." So what started as a supposedly innocent dialogue has led to an ongoing process of theological discussions. Of course, the conversation revealed a common love for the Lord and His Word and a large measure of theological agreement. You have to ask yourself, though, where does all the funding come from to support these dialogues? Between November 6 and 7 of 2007, some 250 Christian leaders from over 70 nations gathered in Limuru, Kenya. The extremely diverse group, which gathered under the rubric of the Global Christian Forum, the GCF, was a meeting unlike any other in modern times. For the first time, Pentecostals and evangelicals sat down with Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, and representatives of the African instituted churches. Many of those present called the meeting historic. Certainly it was unprecedented. John Graz, Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director at the General Conference, John Kakembo, Ministerial Director of the East Central Africa Division, and William G. Johnson, Assistant to the President for Interfaith Relations for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, attended the forum on behalf of the church. John Graz is listed as a committee member. This would indicate he was more than just an observer. The guidelines drawn up from the forum include: the GCF should move to the next level in providing a platform for building relationships. The GCF should therefore continue to organize gatherings periodically, including at the global level, which facilitates sharing theological issues, enhance our understanding and appreciation of different Christian traditions, and offer an experience of others' modes of worship. And because our encounter with one another as brothers and sisters in Christ must affect our behavior and attitudes as we return to our own communities and contexts, the GCF committee and participants should encourage regional and national Christian forums, as well as forums for specialized ministries such as reconciliation, healing, justice, and so on. It further stated, GCF participants value the opportunity to take concrete steps toward a greater experience of Christian unity without abandoning theological distinctives and traditional identities. One aspect of this unity is the evidence provided by our shared faith journeys that we are fellow agents of God's mission called and sent by the same Lord Jesus Christ and empowered by the same Holy Spirit. We believe that this recognition of sharing in God's mission must be manifested at the local level, as well as that the expansion of the GCF via regional, national, and local forums could improve our understanding of unity. Please keep in mind that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not only a participant of this forum, but a member of its committee. The current committee lists Dr. Ganoun Diop as the representative of the SDA Church. Diop is the Associate Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty and the Director for United Nations Relations for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The second issue of the College and University Dialogue for 2008 notes that Diop was the director and coordinator of 5 interfaith study centers around the world. The issue states the following: these centers are established by the World Church to promote better understanding of and fresh approaches to Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, secularism, and postmodernism. Diop was asked the question. The Center for Hinduism told us they are having success by promoting an Indian style of worship. What is that? Diop answered, worshiping in Indian style does not mean worshiping in Hindu temples. What it means is to adapt worship forms such as singing and preaching to local traditional culture that in no way contradicts Christian imperatives. Not so long ago, I was in India and observed worshipers seated on the floor and singing lyrics with traditional Indian melodies, not the Western style hymns. They are using local musical instruments. Israel didn't have to worship in pagan temples to corrupt themselves. By bringing paganism into their houses of worship, they became corrupt. Our ministry was actually able to get this video footage of how this supposedly traditional Seventh-day Adventist church worships in India. As you can see, this is far from Christian worship. In fact, it is more Hindu than Christian. Not only are we having dialogue with other churches and councils, but we're also inviting non-Adventists to speak in our churches and institutions. On April 14, 2008, Andrews University Seminary Dean announced 2 guest speakers for an all-day lectureship. Dr. Roger Schroeder and Dr. Stephen Bevins, both Jesuit-trained professors of missiology at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, Illinois. Each has degrees from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, the same university Dr. Samuele Bacchiocchi attended. One lecture was entitled, Jesus as Universal Savior, Catholics and Seventh-day Adventists in Mission. Now, why would our leading university invite 2 Jesuits to speak to us about how to conduct mission? What could they possibly teach us? The Adventist Review featured an article regarding the April 2010 Ministry Professional Growth Seminar organized by the Ministerial Association of the General Conference of SDAs and held at California's First Congregational Church. 2 non-Adventists were invited to speak. This included Marguerite Schuster, an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church and professor of preaching and theology at Fuller Theological Seminary.
She also spoke at a previous professional growth seminar. The other was Miroslav Volf, the Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology at Yale Divinity School. Volf is a Croatian Protestant theologian, intellectual, and public speaker, and one of the most celebrated theologians of our day. He is very involved in ecumenism and interfaith efforts. Another example where Jesuits have been invited to speak in our institutions was at Loma Linda University Church. On March 2, 2012, Jesuit Greg Boyle spoke during the Vespers program for the annual postgraduate convention of Loma Linda University. In another recent example, the Auburn Seventh-day Adventist Church in California invited two priests, a Catholic and a Lutheran, to speak in their church while participating in Lent services. On March 6, 2014, the Auburn Journal reported, several Auburn Christian groups have been working together to create a series of shared services to unite their respective organizations in observation of Lent, a religious season of fasting, repentance, moderation, spiritual discipline, and reflection on the teachings of Jesus Christ. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was listed as one of the 6 participating churches. Each group will host one day and will feature a guest pastor from a different church. Catholic priest Arnold Parungao of St. Teresa of Avila Catholic Church in Auburn said, "The joint events are an effort to unite Christians in the community." Auburn Seventh-day Adventist pastor Dan Appel said he believes that the collaboration among organizations will bring about good faith among Auburn Christians. "I think the intent was to just give the people the opportunity to get acquainted with other pastors." He said, "So often people hear the same speaker over and over again. This gives people the chance to get better acquainted. There is also an attempt to show that while we may have theological differences with each other, we still respect each other as followers of God."
Place in that churches and pastors who may view all kinds of theological issues in all kinds of different ways still have deep respect and love for each other. And acceptance. And we all unite around the one thing we all have in common, and that's Jesus Christ.
Amen. Amen.
I come from a church that hasn't always played well in the sandbox of life with other churches. And this local congregation, at least, is very committed to changing that. And we're just delighted that you're here and that you accept us enough, Bruce, to be willing to come and to share this time with us.
And may they be in us so that the world will believe you sent me.
I've given them glory over me, so they may be one with us, just as we are one with each other. I am in them, and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me, and that you love them as much as you do.
I've come to know as a man of God, who I respect as a person as well as a follower of Jesus. And Arnold, it's a privilege and pleasure to welcome you to our culture this evening.
I am a Catholic priest preaching at Auburn Adventist Church.
Yeah.
I would like to thank first and foremost the host for tonight, the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Auburn, for our Wednesday Lenten services. Thank you for your warm welcome to all the Christians of different traditions here in the great city of Auburn, California. Like the love Jesus showed 2,000 years ago, offering oneself so that others will be happy. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you.
Now, since when have Seventh-day Adventists observed Lent? Certainly we see here a fulfillment of Ellen White's prediction that Protestantism will unite with Catholicism. How sad the Seventh-day Adventist Church at Auburn, California is part of this fulfillment. Finally, when you read the many Adventist books and publications printed each year, it's quite evident that ecumenism is alive and well within the Adventist Church. The authors are quite infatuated with quoting from writers not of our faith. Take, for example, the feature article in the Adventist Review, January 10, 2013, by Eric Anderson. It was titled, "What is a Mystic?" Let us not miss echoes of other saints. Suspicious sometimes of instruction from other Christians, we should candidly acknowledge our multi-denominational heritage and admit that God's true children include Methodists and Anglicans and even Catholics. The fact that the potent words of our hymns come from both ancient Christians and modern ones, from Protestants as well as Catholics, is highly significant. If non-Adventist hymn writers can accurately articulate the promise of union with Christ, perhaps we can safely imitate at least a few of the practices they have used to prepare their hearts for transformation. The practices he goes on to mention are nothing more than a disguised form of spiritualism that has swept through the Christian world. We'll look at that in another episode. The church is certainly in a Laodicean state. How many of our leaders, teachers, and ministers are really serving Satan?
These chairs are pretty heavy, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So, Ernie, tell me, what did you find out about the Jesuits?
Well, on the surface, they appear as harmless Christians seeking to spread the gospel. However, once you dig a little deeper, you learn that they are a very secretive military organization bent on destroying Protestantism and establishing the Pope as the head of all religions.
Did you find any evidence that they have infiltrated the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Yes, there is some evidence, but you have to remember that they are very good at covering their tracks. Based on what Ellen White wrote in The Great Controversy and what God has shown in my dreams, there's no doubt that the Jesuits have penetrated the church. There are leaders who are not what people think they are. Soon when God cleanses His church, they will be removed.
So you're saying that we know they have infiltrated the church, but we can't point them out specifically?
That's right. This is why we need to be careful who we call a Jesuit. Let's leave that to God. Not all unfaithful pastors are Jesuits. Some are just deceived and unknowingly are serving the Jesuits.
Well, this just shows we need to be studying our Bible and spirit of prophecy so that we're not deceived.
That's right. So what did you find out about ecumenism?
I have no doubt that Adventism is caught up with ecumenism, even though the leadership claims they're not. There has been quite a lot of dialogue with other churches and councils over the years. We're also seeing non-Adventists, including Jesuits, being invited to preach in our churches and universities. Additionally, numerous books and publications promote an ecumenical spirit in subtle ways.
You know, it sounds like the Jesuits have done their job well.
Yes, they have. Many of our leaders don't even believe the Catholic Church should be singled out as the Antichrist anymore. Reminds me of what Ellen White wrote in The Great Controversy. Instead of standing in defense of the faith once delivered to the saints, They're now, as it were, apologizing to Rome for their uncharitable opinion of her, begging pardon for their bigotry.
Well, Isabel, it's obvious that Adventists need to get back to proclaiming the message God raised them up to give. They need to call people out of Babylon, not into it. In evangelism, Ellen White warned, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers," refers not only to the marriage of Christians with the ungodly, but to all alliances in which the parties are brought into intimate association, and in which there is need of harmony in spirit and action. There can be no harmony between God's last day remnant church and the fallen churches. Having dialogue with other religions is a complete waste of time.
Exactly. In the Review and Herald, August 4, 1904, Ellen White wrote, "The alliances made by the Israelites with their heathen neighbors resulted in the loss of their identity as God's peculiar people. They became leavened by the evil practices of those with whom they formed forbidden alliances. Affiliation with worldlings caused them to lose their first love and their zeal for God's service. The advantages they sold themselves to gain brought only disappointment and caused the loss of many souls."
Isabel, that message is just what God has shown me is going to happen to the Seventh-day Adventist Church when He cleanses it by fire. Let's pray that people will see the truth for these last days and realize the danger they are in before that happens. Many souls will be lost because they have followed the practices of Babylon.
In our next episode,
Between September 13 and 23 of 1900, something new and strange was manifested at Muncie, Indiana. In another letter written by Haskell's wife, we get further information that helps us understand what type of music they had adopted to complement their revival and false doctrine. In 1995, Warren wrote the book, The Purpose-Driven Church. It became an instant bestseller.
Today, this command is not followed in many Seventh-day Adventist churches. Jesus is not happy when our worship services become entertainment services with loud, upbeat, repetitive rock or pop music. How sad that people who think they are worshiping Christ are in fact worshiping Satan. Where is the reverence? Where is the sacred and sweet music?